Welcome. I welcome Jason. I welcome Vivek, and I welcome everybody else who is viewing this program. We are 20 minutes late, and I'm very sorry for that. We had some few technical issues, but let us continue. This is a series of discussions that we are having on the topic of identity and belonging. Basically, what we are trying to do is talk to authors who have written about books on various aspects of this vast subject. And today we have with us Jason Fernandes, Dr. Jason Keith Fernandes, who is a researcher at the Center for Research in Anthropology in Lisbon. And we are talking to him is Vivek Menezes, who is a writer, photographer, and co-curator, co-founder of the Goa Arts and Literature Festival. I'll hand over the floor to you so that we can start now. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard. Jason, so round two, we'll do it again. Thank you, Leonard, and thank you to Dog Ears for hosting this series of conversations. I think it's been quite successful so far. We've been able to speak to different people from who've put out new books, and it's been, I think, nice to continue these kinds of conversations that we normally have in the rest of the year. I do hope that it's translating to book sales. All the books in our series, including this excellent book by Jason, are available at Dog Ears Bookshop, and he ships them all over India as well as the world. I know Roanna, who's part of this, who is tuned into the conversation, has received it in Australia. So please do buy the book. Our next conversation next Saturday is with the eminent historian, Dr. Romila Thapar. I'm really looking forward to that. She's 88 years old, and she's written the most magisterial book about dissent, which should be fun to have a conversation about. But this is a especially pleasurable moment, and I have the pleasure twice because it is our own Jason Keith Fernandes's first book, and it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. It's called Citizenship in a Caste Polity, Religion, Language, and Belonging in Goa. Congratulations, Jason.
Thank
as
you.
I mentioned earlier, Jason has emerged onto into the public intellectual spheres as many as maybe 20 years ago. I first recall reading him on GoaNet when he was still in law school, and it was always clear he had an independent way of thinking and an original voice, and there was always the potential that he would contribute something important to our small but important culture, not only to us but perhaps also for other people in the world. And I'm super glad that this ambitious, intelligent, very carefully wrote book has made it into the world. And under normal circumstances, we'd have had a excellent event at the Goa Arts and Literature Festival for it. But in the absence of that, here it is. Congratulations, Jason.
Thank you, Vivek. Let me just say that so as to not mess up the connection, I am going to keep quiet while you're speaking and not interrupt. In terms for like polite things like thank you and this and that. Please assume that I'm fulfilling all the requirements of polities.
Okay. That's nice. Jason, I was reading your book side by side quite often with another book in the series of New Perspectives in South Asian History, Orient Black Swan, which is Parag Parob's book. And both of these books are unusual and useful in that we do not have a ton of good reliable social science work done on Goa post 1961. Actually, throughout the 20th century, but post 1961. We don't even have decent data quite often about the 50s and the 40s, for instance. And I was looking for some. For instance, I was just looking for the population of Goans outside Goa in 1950. Very difficult to find. You had to really cobble together information from other parts of the world. So tell me, let's start with this. Given that most people tend to look at with great interest what happened in Goa in the 16th century, and now, of course, there's an increasing interest in what happened in the pre-Portuguese period. Why is it you looked at post-1961?
because as you pointed out, Vivek, it's there's almost a complete gap. The story to how I got to this topic, though, is I was trying to figure out how I was trying to explain the large number of Portuguese flags and Portuguese state symbols on vehicles in Goa in 2008. And so, as I began that work, I realized that any researcher builds on work that is already done, and I realized that where many of these Portuguese state symbols were appearing on vehicles of persons who did not seem to have a, let's say, a generational um, relationship with the Portuguese language. So that would be, let's say, working caste, working class Goans. There was nothing to explain them, right? No work I could rely on. So I abandoned the work on the flags and decided to do something that would be more foundational, right? So how do we explain what is going on in Goa rather than explain what Goans are doing outside of Goa? So this is why I began working on the issue. And in many ways, the issue came to me. I was completely unaware of the demand for the recognition of the Roman script until I attended this history hour organized by the Xavier Center, where Uday Bembre, if I'm not mistaken, no, sorry, it was, oh dear, in my excitement, I'm forgetting his name, but there was this discussion on the Roman script. No, sorry, on the problems with the Konkani language um, in the state in the Official Language Act, and that moved on to another session where by Uday Bembre, which I chaired. When I chaired, I realized that I was able to see the whole social panorama of the issue in front of me. I'd already been introduced to the issue in the session earlier,
But
and I
Ramnath
realized,
Naik,
yes, Ramnath Naik, correct, Ramnath Naik. That's when I realized I had the whole issue spread out in front of me, and I should really work on this. This would provide some way of understanding, explaining Goa, contemporary Goa, and that was how I got in.
Jason, one of the things that I really liked about the book, and readers should know that it came from your PhD
Hmm.
research, and it's a very carefully constructed, I would say, meticulously constructed argument, which is what I appreciated about it. It's step by step, a logical kind of set of assertions. Generally grounded in a great deal of citations, which is what I appreciated about it. But there is a kind of an overarching idea which I thought was kind of interesting, which is that to some extent how the Goan Catholics' experience of Indian citizenship would be an interesting way in which to create a different route for discussing citizenship in secular
Hmm.
India, which I thought is I think it's very challenging and an interesting way to go about it. As you know, there are a number of this case has been made in different ways on the artistic and cultural side. A different way, a
Hmm.
different idea of India
Hmm.
is continually being projected out of Goa, and quite effectively, actually,
Hmm.
in fact, seductively. One of the reasons why we are overwhelmed with tourists at the moment right now is because
Hmm.
Goa represents this kind of liminal space, which is a different idea, a different way of being Indian almost. So can you tell me? But you've done it in a very interesting way about citizenship. Can you elaborate a little bit about it? How did you come about it? What did you discover? How did your ideas change? I'm particularly interested in how your ideas changed because as Goans from whichever community we come from, we often inherit a kind of rock solid position or an imagined rock solid position from the experience of our families
Hmm.
or the experience of our particular locations. But but when you open, the thing is when you meet other people and you research and you look around, that position becomes more shaky, and you understand other sides as well. So I'm very interested in that. Could you explain a little bit more? Or do you want me to rephrase the question?
No, I think there are two questions. The first question is, oh dear, I've forgotten what the first question. But the second question definitely is, how did I change? How did I change my position? The first question is, I've come, I use Goa as a way to talk about India, right?
Yes,
So let's
correct.
this first
An
question and
alternate
then,
idea,
pardon me.
an alternate idea of Indian
Yeah.
citizenship.
So I think one of the larger problems with the study of India, at least social sciences, at least sociology, anthropology, perhaps even history, even in fact post-colonial theory, is that you talk about India, but you're actually talking about British India, which is to say, you're not talking about the princely states, you're talking about directly administered British India. But you're not even, in fact, talking very often about British India. All your assumptions come from Bengal, invariably, or at least this was the case at least a decade ago. Things are changing now. So this is really, really annoying and frustrating because you are using assumptions that don't necessarily work, right? And they most certainly do not work in the case of Goa because Goan history is, as you know, well know, Goan history is completely different. Uh, since I'm talking about citizenship, merely on the basis of citizenship, Goans are electing um, Goans to the Portuguese Parliament before the Indians have the War of Independence or the Great Mutiny or whatever you want to call it, right? Which is to say, we are citizens of a European democracy at least a century before Indians can become citizens. Indians are always subjects until 1947. This has to have some theoretical implication. How do we take that? How do we take that theoretical implication seriously and draw up a more nuanced understanding of India, of Goa, right? So this was the first challenge that I felt I needed to address. Secondly, I mean, I may be Goan, but I've also been raised in India. I've been subjected to the kind of regime of Indian academia. I've grown up as an Indian until I discovered my Goanness, right?
Wow.
So thank you, I guess. So the when I that's when I so once you start re-looking at things, you realize something is really odd, that Goans need to speak from a Goan perspective, if only to help India understand itself better, or British India understand itself better. You can shine, you need a mirror to see your own face. And that mirror, in the case of British India, could be Goa. It could also be French India, right? It could be any number of princely states. But the mirror that I can hold up is Portuguese India. And just if you take one thing, since I'm talking about citizenship, Indian social science, especially since the destruction of the Babri Masjid, has been concerned with communalism and the threat to secularism, and it obsessively focuses on the Indian Muslim, right? Now, I have no problem with a focus on the Indian Muslim because I recognize that this is a community, especially in North India, that has been mercilessly pushed into a corner, robbed, beaten, abused. So I have no problems with this focus. My problem emerges when the focus is obsessive, when you only talk about the Muslim when you're talking about the problems with Indian secularism. Because there are other marginalized groups in India. The Catholics in Goa could be one example. There are Christians across India. There are other marginalized groups. So we need to talk about them, and we need to talk to each other, right? Only when you break up this Hindu-Muslim binary will you actually start progressing and producing a basis for secularism in India? Because if the Hindu is the Indian self and the Muslim is the other to the self, if you're going to have an obsessive focus on the Muslim other, the the real topic of conversation is actually the Hindu self, because you're always focused on the other, right? So we need to break up this binary and create space for talking about other communities. So this is what I attempted to do, and well, I'm looking forward to the reviews of the work. Addressing your second question.
Jason, pause for a second, because that was it's a tremendous amount of amazingly interesting things you said, and we'll definitely come to that second question about how your point, how about your view changed. But I'd like to ask you. I mean, it got very heavy very soon. I mean, earlier than I expected, earlier than I expected in this conversation. But obviously I would agree. I mean, there are many things that are inarguable between us, at least. I mean, post-colonial theory, certainly the way that it's pursued in academia in the West, not only leaves out the Goans, it leaves out the experience of the princely states, it leaves out huge swathes of the country, the entire Northeast, it leaves out French India. It's not effective or useful to us. Um, uh, However, what I think what has been quite potent in India is a kind of it has been quite potent in the Goan experience, is the repeated creation and projection of an idea of India from the Goan point of view. And it starts even with people who are in the Portuguese parliament. Goans represent, in fact, I would say that a foundational element is the Goans who are representing Goa in the Portuguese parliament, from people like Francisco Luis Gomes. I mean, Francisco Luis Gomes said in much more eloquently than even someone like Vivek Menezes, for instance, who said it much later. Francisco Luis Gomes was making a case for not only him being Indian, but for India being free, India being independent. I mean, he said, "I demand light and liberty for India," right? I mean, he said it in French, and he's a Portuguese guy saying it. I mean, these wonderful nuances that come out of Goa. So wouldn't you say, by focusing on these kinds, I do agree that there's a kind of a dominant narrative that comes out of certain parts of the Indian academia, by continually focusing on them, don't you think we're giving that too much importance? And why can we not understand that they are the accommodation, right, where they're different ideas of India, including one which has been very persuasive within the Goan sphere for 200 years at least, right? There's a separate idea of how Goans can be part of India, right? I mean, this it exists. There's a long intellectual lineage to it. I mean, isn't it? Can these two ideas not coexist? Is my point.
Let me take a slight detour. I want to go back to when you began, you pointed out how you were reading also Parag Parabo's excellent book on Goa under Bandodkar. I'd also like to point out to the work of Rochelle Pinto, her Between Empires, right, which for me was one of the foundational works to read. Because it also allows you to see why people like Francisco Luis Gomes are talking the way they do. These gentlemen that we refer to, or you referred to just now, and that we often refer to, are persons who are speaking at a particular moment in history. They are producing an orientalized idea of India,
sure,
right? And so in many ways, they are the fathers of the Hindu nationalism that we are living right now, because Hindu nationalism emerges from Orientalism, right? Sure. So I'm not saying that they wanted to create a Hindu Rashtra, but the ideas that they created were taken up by other people and have produced the monster that we see today. Point two is that oh dear, I keep forgetting where I am.
But take a piece of paper and make notes. I'm doing it.
Yes, yes, I do have that that piece of paper by my side. Point two is that this. Oh dear, I've really forgot. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry.
It's okay. We'll come back to it.
We,
My question really is, I mean, you're quite right in that Orientalism leads to a kind of revivalism, and that revivalism, I mean, one of the things is, as you point out in your book, and in fact, Rochelle has pointed out in her book, it's the times you have to understand ideas in the times that these ideas emerge, and I wonder whether, and I would dispute even that that people like Francisco Luis Gomes or his intellectual successors thought of. I mean, they definitely had this Hindu idea, but I think that it was Hindu perhaps with a small h. If you can think of a Hindu with a small h as opposed to a capital H, I think that's clearly what emerged. And I was struck in the book that I was just reading recently. I went back to the comments made by Orlando Ribeiro, right? And Orlando Ribeiro, who submitted a report to Salazar in 1956, he said, which I think we should discuss a little bit. He said that, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he said that of all the territories he had ever visited, and he had spent months here, there, and everywhere, that Goa was the least Portuguese, and he himself italicized the least Portuguese of all the Portuguese territories, including Guinea, which had only in his kind of colonial language been pacified in 1918. And he also said that he saw that Goans, to a large extent, saw the Portuguese presence in their midst as a kind of a schist, which I guess you could say a kind of a pustule or a kind of a annoying little irritation in the middle of a kind of a Hindu revivalism. Again, I would argue that is a small h, because these guys, like the Orient, they were kind of I would say blinkered. And when they saw someone wearing a sari, for instance, I mean, you see it in Goa even today, where someone's wearing a sari or a bindi, that immediately becomes Hindu, or even someone with a name like myself, it's quote unquote a Hindu name. So I think that would you care to comment about that?
yes, in the course of your comment, I also remembered what the point that was escaping me was. So thank you very much.
Start with that.
Point one. I don't think these guys were producing Hindu with a small h. I think they are responsible, and I acknowledge that they are operating in their times. They are responsible for producing Hindu. We lost connection for a while. Are you there? Hello?
Yeah, come back. You're back.
Okay, wonderful. So I said I would argue that they are the ones responsible for creating Hindu with a capital H, because what they do is they systematize all of the various social practices, social groups into this one kind of body called Hindu, right? So this is point one. Point two, to go back to the point that I had forgotten, which is pertinent to the discussion here, is that when people like Francisco Luis Gomes are speaking and they're talking about independence and all of that, what they are doing is fulfilling a role that is not dissimilar to those of the Creole elites in Latin America, right? And similar to what the Indian nationalists are doing in British India, which is to say, we don't want the European metropolitan to be here anymore. We are capable of governing ourselves. So this is exactly what they're doing. They're taking a cue, as it were, from the Latin Americans and are trying to create a. I mean, for a long time, there were people who wanted a Portuguese republic, which would include provinces like Goa, which would be self-governed, right? So this is essentially the Goan elite wanting to create more space for themselves. What in the book I called room for maneuver, right? Trying to push the people around them further apart, so that they can have more space to do what they want to do. And this, I think, happens subsequent to the integration into India, where especially you have the dominant caste Hindu elite who are able to now rule the roost, get more space, are more vocal, more legitimate, or have this more legitimate power to act and basically call the shots. So this is I think what is going on with people like Francisco Luis Gomes.
It's interesting. I take your point. I mean, he connects to people like Joseph de Cunha and others who are
Hmm.
making a set of collective arguments. It's interesting. At some point, I saw a bunch of papers from the first meeting of the Konkani Bhasha Mandal, which took place in Bombay, and it had there were various people speaking, and there are some notes which were taken at that time, which I've seen, and they also fit into this idea very much. So this, which brings us to the second part of my first question, Jason, which is that these are how did your views change in the process of studying and researching this? A lot of these views are, there's a position, that you started with. Um, how has that adapted to what you found in the course of your years of research?
So there was this. I came into the field almost from the start when I went attended those two sessions. The justice position was very clear that the Roman script needs to be recognized by law, and you cannot suffocate them from the largesse of the state, the kind of funds that go into supporting literature in the Roman script, theatre, cantarin, etc., etc.
Jason, just if you don't mind, can you? There may be people on, because we're jumping into this topic. There may be people who are tuning in who don't understand exactly what the problem is. So, can
Okay.
you explain what the problem is, and then how you came to it from the justice point of view?
So in 1987, the Konkani was legislated as the official state language of Goa. What happened, however, was that they recognized only in the Nagari script as official language, excluding in the process the much older and definitely more vibrant Roman script. These are the two scripts that are used to write Konkani in Goa. What happens subsequently is that using this definition of Konkani, the persons who are in charge of the Konkani establishment, which by and large belong to the Saraswat caste, whose language form is also pushed through the schools as the Konkani language to be spoken, start cutting off state support to writing, to cultural production in the Roman script or dialects associated with the Roman script, right? So from almost from the beginning, the justice position was clear that you just cannot do this. As I studied more and more and realized that in fact the Roman script has a longer history than Konkani in the Nagari script, this position became more and more confirmed, right? So this is fairly obvious. I mean, if you read the book, it's clear. Where I did change was in my attitude to the persons who I thought were being unjust. This is to say, the Catholics for Devanagari, and the largely Saraswat activists for Konkani. I began to become more sympathetic. I understood why they are the way they are, right? If you take the Catholics for Devanagari, who are largely, but not exclusively, priests, you realize that these are the descendants of people like Francisco Luis Gomes, Gerson de Cunha. These are the people who these are the people who have who operate within an Orientalist frame, who see India as being Hindu, and they see themselves as being aberrations to the Indian rule. Therefore, their attempt is to try and create a safety mechanism for their people. They see themselves as leaders of their people. They are concerned for their people, and they're trying to create a space for them. This I have no doubt about. I do not doubt their FIDs, their good intentions. However, they do this. They're able to do this largely because of their upper caste position. Because as Catholic Brahmins, they can lay claim to an older Brahmanical tradition, imagined, but nevertheless a Brahmanical tradition, and then kind of work themselves into the Brahmanical establishment and use that position at the table as a way to secure larger Catholic interests. This is for the Catholics for Devanagari. With the Saraswat activists, you realize that a lot of them are descendants of. Well, you must remember that people like Vajay Valaulikar, who we know as Shenoy Goemba, we know him as a Konkani language activist. But if you look at the record, you realize that he's actually a caste activist. He's actually someone trying to secure the interests of the newly formed, this is in the early 1900s, the newly formed Saraswat Jati, or the Saraswat caste. These are people who are not recognized as Brahmins by people, whether in Bombay or in Karnataka. They're not recognized as Brahmins by those around them. And this is all happening at a time when dominant caste groups are mobilizing to create these kind of regions which will be self-governing. Right? There's already in a kind of anticipation of independence from the British, and you're creating linguistic homelands. And so, if the Konkanas have their homeland as Maharashtra, if the Haviks have a space in Karnataka, so should the Saraswats have some place. And what better place than Goa, right? So there's this attempt to create Goa as a Saraswat homeland that then becomes translated into this thing of Goa for Goans, where you use um, um, Catholic, largely marginalized Catholics as cannon fodder, but you're essentially securing Goa as a space where the Saraswat can call the shots. So you can sympathize with them as well. But with both groups, you realize that this is just not on when you are either um, humiliating people who are producing culture. This is, or you are deliberately excluding. So this is not on. So, but I can appreciate why they are the way they are. But this does not excuse the position.
Right. That's interesting. One of the things that's happening here is that a lot of the language and the phrasing and the positions you're taking, there are many of them which are contested, right? I mean, a lot of the things that you're saying about the history, about the positions of these various. I mean, for instance, you said that Konkani has a much longer history in the Romi script than it does in Devanagari. There are many. I mean, it should be acknowledged. I'm not going to. We're not going to have a back and forth about each one of these minutiae in your conversations, but it should be acknowledged, and I'd like to formally kind of acknowledge that these are contested positions. There's scholarship. I'll just point to my favorite. I know he's not a big favorite of yours, but Jose Pereira, who has a completely different what should I say set of historical markers that he lays out a position. So these are contested positions, but I find what you're saying super interesting, and I must say what I liked. Your book is an important and valuable book, but the chapter I enjoyed the most was a most fascinating chapter called, which is the fifth, which is called humiliation in political society. And you speak often about this idea of humiliation, and the Catholic, the Romy Konkani speaker, and also the Catholic Goan, kind of being humiliated, being put in a position that is humiliating by the contemporary state in Goa and India. Would you mind elaborating a little? I mean, it seems to me, to a large extent, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm not arguing with you, but I would like to hear examples about it. I think the audience should also hear examples about it, because it seems to me that the Goan Catholic is it's in economics, there's a term, kind of a dominant minority, where the cultural space of the state is the presence of Goan Catholics is massively overrepresented in terms of its population size in the cultural, political, social footprint of the state, and the way the state thinks of itself, the way the state projects itself to a large extent. But I'd like to hear more about this, and I think it'll be valuable. If you'd like, I can ask you mini questions to lead you along the way. But I'd like to hear about why you think, first of all, that this idea of humiliation is an important one to consider in the context of your research and your work, and secondly, how it plays out in Goa.
Right. So I just like to point out that I do not use the word Goan Catholics very often to refer to a single community. I don't think that this community exists, right? We are Catholics before God and within the church, okay? But culturally speaking or socially speaking, there are multiple groups. Each of these groups have different interests, and very often, at least the elites have been operating to their own interests, not to the interests of the larger group. And the manner in which the question of the Roman script has been ignored over centuries is a great example, right? Konkani was dismissed by the Catholic elite in the early 20th century, or late 19th, early 20th century, when they dismissed Konkani because they were speaking Portuguese and they supported Marathi for the Hindu elite. They subsequently, in the course of the Konkani language agitation in the late 70s, 80s, in the 80s, ignored the Roman script and they pushed Nagari. So this Catholic elite has not fulfilled its role. The role of elites is to support the larger community that they emerge from. I know that this is not a popular view, especially if you come from a leftist background, but well, this is the view I hold. If you are an organic elite, you work for the community you emerge from, and this is not the role that they have fulfilled. So we have multiple Catholic communities. All Catholics, nevertheless, do feel the slight. However, the slight that is felt differently and is managed differently. The slight felt by dominant caste Catholics is dealt with by saying, I'm also Brahmin, I'm also Saraswat, or I am Rajput if I am Shardo, right? If you do not belong to any one of these dominant castes, you don't have a leg to stand on in the Brahminized Hindu nationalist environment that is India since 1947. The Subaltern caste Catholics have had to deal much more with this case. Let me give you an example. I was in the course of my research. I went to one of these events organized by these Nagrivadis, these persons who support Nagri, and this gentleman, lovely fellow. And I, we were chatting very, in this Goan manner, very polite, teacups in our hand, fruit cake. And he was so happy discussing. He says, Konkani, we have these Konkani elocution competitions, and they've been very successful. And invariably, he says, the prize is always won by the Catholic girls. But then he says, but they speak Konkani so beautifully, you don't even realize that they're Catholic, right? So he's saying this to me, and I'm smiling at him. And he's not even realized that he's insulted me and he's insulted Catholics, because the crux of what you're saying is, if you are Catholic, you don't speak Konkani properly. To speak Konkani properly, you should speak it like us. And this gentleman is Saraswat, right? There was this gentleman who I refer to in the book, who I call Babu. Babu went for a interview in the Goa University to fill a position in the Konkani department. This is a man who has studied Konkani, goes there and sits in front of the panel, and the head of the panel says, "Babu, tu amka kite sang?" And then he repeats, "Babu, tu amka kite sang?" So, which is to say, "Babu, why don't you tell us something? Say something." And Babu, in our conversation, he looks at me and he says, "Jason, do you know what he was saying to me?" So I was completely clueless. So I said, "No, what?" And he said he wanted to hear me, and he wanted to hear the rest of the panel, how I speak in Konkani, to show that my Konkani is not that good, right? There is another example I can give you where, for example, this theatrist pointed out that his children, and similarly children of other people, come back from school and they tell their grandparents, their parents, "Mommy, Daddy, your Konkani is wrong," right? So the language that they learn in school teaches them that the Konkani that they speak is wrong. These are very many ways in which working class Catholics are humiliated and insulted. Or there is this more famous. I mean, what I struck in my mind is where this priest said to me, "Culture." When I was speaking about the culture of the Romance, the Konkani language novel, culture. What culture do they have? He tells me. It's matter of fact. These are the various ways in which Catholics in Goa are humiliated, right? Well, I should not say humiliated, I should say shamed, because as I point out in the book, humiliation happens when I stand up and say, "This shaming is not on. This is not cricket, and you will not do so anymore." This is when it becomes humiliation. When I claim, humiliation is a claim. So there's a lot of shaming that happens. And what the Roman script activists are doing are saying that this kind of humiliation will not do. It must stop, and we must be given our legitimate place within the Goan political sphere.
Interesting. That lovely story about the person who told you about the Catholic girls winning the prizes is in your book, and I enjoyed reading that. And of course, I remembered that this is it's we are a complex society. I have often been told by the I mean I was a little skeptical when these Portuguese singing competitions started, right? Because we started them a while ago, and I remember having a conversation with the organizer, like they don't understand the language, right? They're just learning the song. But he told me, and you'll hear this repeatedly, and I think there's nothing wrong with it. They often tell me, but that Hindu girl one, she sang so beautifully in Konkani, right? Which is exactly the same thing, in its own way. As we talk, I continually, I just want to make a side reference to this book. I don't know if Leonard has it yet in his bookshop, but Ananya Chakravarti, who's a professor at Georgetown, has written a book called The Empire of Apostles: Religion, Accommodatio, and the Imagination of Empire in Early Modern Brazil and India. And I think the idea of accommodatio is quite important here. A lot of what Jason has been talking about the early scholars of Konkani, the early protagonists, even for Goa, like people like Francisco Luis Gomes or or Jason de Cunha or many others, actually were functioning. They had a kind of form of accommodatio in the opposite direction, rather than within the Indian thought sphere, but the opposite way. Jason, I found your arguments very compelling. Tell me, will if say the I think it could easily happen, but I'll ask you whether you think it could happen. If the Indian state, if Goa state, say in the next elections, things are shambolic in 20 different directions, but let's say that a certain section of the political elites in Goa who circulate from party to party, let's say that they hit upon the idea that making Romi Konkani an official language is going to be, the latest of a series of empty promises that have been made to the Goan people and very often delivered. Um, Suppose Romi Konkani becomes an official language. Well, what is that going to do? How is that going to change things?
This is one question you've asked. There's also another point I want to make about Portuguese and that Portuguese singing competition, but I'll do it
Please,
subsequently
please.
after I address the Roman script issue. Um, how will it change? Well, I think at least at the level, formally, in that the level of discourse, things will change. If you now have state awards being given to persons who are writing in the Roman script, it will give a boost to this kind of production, which has thus far been kind of pushed aside. Point one. So it'll give. Please remember that there was, I think, only one Konkani Nagari script Konkani newspaper in Goa, which had to shut down, and shut down after years of being supported by one of these business houses, the Salgaonkars, if I'm not mistaken. Right?
Correct.
This is not the case with the Roman script newspapers. If you allow for the free market to rule, right, there is no doubt that and if you add state power to it, there is no doubt that you will see a revival in terms of Konkani, right? Whether if you, the kind of cultural validation that will happen to Catholics when they see that the Roman script is being used to in the Gazette, in official greetings and such like, that itself will change things dramatically. It will also challenge the creeping Hindu nationalization that is happening of Goa, right? I very often point out the fact that in the states where language is the basis for statehood, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, you have the language being represented as a Hindu goddess, right? Karnataka is a great example. You have the Kannada Devi. This is not the case in Goa. Why not? It is not the case in Goa because the persons who support Konkani are by and large the Catholic working castes and classes. It is not going to fly. It's not going to fly, and I mean, why would they support for this goddess? They don't have a space for a goddess in their lives, right? So these are the ways in which it would change, and I think this would allow for Goa to become a way more democratic society. Things won't change dramatically overnight. It won't be the end of all problems, but things will change. It would definitely address the Hindu nationalization, And as is increasingly becoming clear, Hindu nationalism is the Indian problem. Hindu nationalism is pushing us away from a secular liberal democracy towards basically a caste polity, which is why I point out in the book. The title of the book is A Caste Polity. I do not call India or Goa a society because you cannot have society when caste is your ruling logic. Yeah. So this would be my answer to your question. I wanted to now subsequently go on to this question that you said that in the Portuguese language, Portuguese song competitions, we often say, "Oh, that girl was Hindu, but still she sang so well." And link it up with Orlando Ribeiro, who you mentioned earlier, who said that Goa is the least Portuguese of all territories. The problem with Orlando Ribeiro is that well, I don't know him that well, but having lived in Portugal for 10 years, having suffered the post colonial socialist individual, this kind of politically correct individual, I can quite safely say that he sounds like a racist to me. Yeah. Because,
Oh, racist.
yes, let me explain. Because he
Sure.
understands Portugueseness only in terms of speaking the language. He doesn't hear Portuguese in Goa, but in other Portuguese territories, he hears Portuguese being spoken. Hence, it is possible for him to say, "Ah, Goa is the least Portuguese of all territories." But if you let's say if a Goan like me who grew up not speaking Portuguese but now speaks Portuguese and he goes to any Portuguese territory, you're instantly at home, right? I imagine even if you don't speak the language, if you don't speak Portuguese and you go to Brazil, you instantly recognize how similar everything is, right? That is only if you're ideologically committed to not seeing the Portugueseness of Goa will you not would you make the statement that Orlando Ribeiro made. The Orlando Ribeiro statement should also be seen in the context of the growing disaffection among the Portuguese elite with the policy of the Estado Novo. They were being excluded from Europe. They were being locked into these colonial games. They were increasingly out of step with Europe, which is why increasingly people pick up this statement by Orlando Ribeiro and say, "See, look, what are you talking about?" But Portugueseness is not restricted merely to the Portuguese language. This is I call it a racist idea because this is how you construct Portugueseness as belonging to a particular group, right? So very often,
I think that's
so so so
sorry.
so when we say that, oh, this Hindu girl, she speaks sings Portuguese so well, this is completely stupid. This is the idea of this basically, I mean, these the Goan elite who the only thing that they had towards the end of the Estado Novo to puff about was the fact that they spoke Portuguese, not recognizing that there were Hindus who were speaking Portuguese exquisitely. All manner of Hindu castes who could manage to get into school were going to school speaking Portuguese. I remember I went with the Portuguese anthropologist Manuel Magalhães to this to a village in the Novas Conquistas, and there was a gentleman there who could speak Portuguese fluently. He said, "Yes, now I don't remember it all that well because I've not had practice. But yeah, I speak Portuguese." So I remember there is this. I went and spoke with a friend's father. Um, he was ailing at the time in Vasco, and this is a man who was pro Marathi, by the way. Huh? I went to him. I was already Portuguese speaking by the time, and said, "Boa tarde, senhor." Instantly, he started speaking to me in Portuguese. So this idea that Hindu girl speaking Portuguese so well is merely an idea, a Catholic elite self-image, where they use Portuguese to define their Brahminness or their Chardonnays, but nothing more than that. I'm done.
I think that lots of valid points there. I would also agree that that Ribeiro was not just by today's standards, but by the standards of the 1950s, a hopeless racialist, racist. And I was just mentioning and that I was reading a book on Salazar, and we talked about it. My reviews are, and so Salazar's language, even by the standards of the 1950s, when he was talking about his own citizens in Mozambique and in Goa, was just god awful. I mean, it's so it's I wouldn't even call it offensive because it's beyond offensive. It's the mindset that's demonstrated is it's quite shocking. So I would agree with you that Ribeiro had a racist point of view, and I also agree that it's very reductionist. And it's a kind of the limited imagination that says that Portuguese-ness has to be and this is very often seen from scholars who come from around the world to Goa, and they're always looking for something that's quote unquote recognizable to them as an element that is Portuguese, when they're not looking at the things which are much more profound, which quite often sometimes can't be seen. Um, I wanted to ask you one of the things that I've been finding very interesting over the last. So I wanted to say two things at the moment right now. First of all, Jason's book is available for sale at Leonard Fernandes's excellent Dog Ears Bookshop. Please try to buy it. There is a link available, and when Jason comes to go, he'll sign it for you. Please buy it. It's an excellent book. I would also like to ask. I would like to ask some questions now. I'd like to call for questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box. We'd be delighted to take some. I'm not in a super hurry to leave at the moment, so we can continue. Jason, I've been engaging with a former Portuguese politician who is now a very interesting kind of mid-Atlantic thinker. His name is Bruno Massais, I think is how you pronounce it in Portuguese. And Bruno, I follow him on Twitter, and he is an unbelievably prolific thinker and writer, and very often on America, has new books on America. But he came out with this very interesting idea, which I had a long exchange with him about, which is that he says that in the 16th and 17th, so we are always talking about, Goa being part of the West, or this was a Salazarist idea. It's an idea which has some ideas, which has some, logic to it. But Massage says that in the 16th century, he believes that Portugal was in effect an Asian country, right? That its internal logic and the way that it conducted itself economically, socially, politically, had become, in the context of its Asian.
I'm still here. We seem to have lost Vivek. I don't know if I'm still with everyone else is with me.
No. We are
Oh, very
here.
good.
I think Vivek has lost.
Oh, good. As long as it's not me.
Just give him.
But I just fill in for Vivek if anyone has questions that they'd like to post on the chat. This might be a good time to start typing those questions in. I'm sure Vivek will be with us presently. There he is.
Sorry, Jason.
Not at all.
Oh, we lost you, actually, I think. Oh, no, you lost me. But I don't know what happened. So my question to you is, if we are reimagining or thinking about again what is citizenship and the idea of identity in the context of Goa, isn't it worthwhile to consider what happened to Portugal as well? I mean, in the same way, what do you think of this idea of Portugal as an Asian country in the 16th and 17th centuries?
Well, Portugal in the 16th or 17th centuries as Asian, I don't know, but I have definitely made the argument that the Portuguese in Goa in the 16th and 17th century were also Asian. They had not merely a European identity, but also an Asian identity. For example, if you take this period in Japan, you have the style called Namban, right? Which refers to Portuguese influenced Japanese productions. What does Namban mean? Namban means southern barbarian, right? So the barbarians, of course, are the Portuguese. But where is the south? The south is not southern Europe, it is southern Asia, because this is where they're coming. They're coming from the south, they're coming from Goa. To the Japanese of the period, then, the Portuguese have an Asian location, or they also have an Asian location, and this should not be forgotten. So there are a number of interesting groups in Portugal right now that are not mainstream, that are making this argument that something was lost in the course of the resetting of Portugal after the revolution. That a good amount of the rhetoric, for example, doesn't leave space to describe Portugal's experiences. It produces Portugal as European to the exclusion of its other heritage. And I think these are interesting arguments. These are interesting, especially for persons, to use a popular term, of color. Yeah, persons who, for example, there is a person of Goan heritage who I posted the other day on Facebook. There's this person compliments him in Portugal. Oh, your Portuguese is wonderful, right? So he says, yes, as is yours, right? So there is this production
Right.
now as a result of this kind of politically correct decolonizing language, which says that, oh yes, we were wrong, and we should not be in Goa or not be in Mozambique, whatever. The unexpected consequences of this has been to produce Portugal as white, right? And this is just as problematic as it is exercising, how shall we say, an authoritarian control over a territory. So no one is saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying there are problems on both sides, and we need to find a via media, and that time is still not over. There is still time to produce this via media.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think the rhetoric certainly from the Salazar book, which I was reading recently and onwards, has never been. I mean, the interesting thing about this whole idea of white, right, which is now actually crossed the Atlantic. Though you could argue it started to some extent in the British Empire. It's a slave designation that came out of North America. And when the idea of white came about, Portuguese themselves were not included. The Portuguese are not white for the first 100 and 150 years of racial categorization in America. Portuguese were not white, so it becomes quite ironic that the Portuguese, in Portugal, and of course you have this wonderful bridge figure. And I know you tend to be more skeptical, but I'm an unabashed admirer of Antonio Costa, who is very often depicted with in a grossly African style by cartoonists in Portugal, with fat lips and a far darker complexion than he has. And of course, he brandishes with great pride a overseas citizenship of India card, make which he's the first world leader. I can tell from your face that you love him. Sorry, Jason. Let's take a question. Please do ask more questions. It'd be very interesting to hear what people think. There's so much to talk about with Jason, and because we tend to know each other, I may not be as focused as I would be with other people. I apologize for that in advance. But Nicola and Lobo, who is a writer with Commonwealth magazine, says, "Thank you for a very interesting discussion. Could you please offer a little bit of insight into the political position of English-speaking Roman Catholics and the role they play in recognition of Roman script?" I'll also have some comments, but please go ahead, Jay.
Thank you, Nicole Ann. What could I say about the English-speaking Goan Catholics? Um, well, it plays out this way. Sometime after the Official Language Act was passed, you have Konkani language activists demand that the state support for schools be given only to schools that teach in the vernacular. So either in Konkani or in Marathi, but not in English. This impacted on the viability, the financial viability of a large number of schools run by the diocese, which are all in English, and educating not just Catholics but persons from various class, caste, and religious backgrounds. This situation continued for at least a decade, after which and there was protest at the time, but then more recently the protest rose up again, saying that enough is enough. We want our children to be educated in English, and we want state support for this. So finally, I think the situation has been there's this temporary arrangement where schools teaching in the English language with English as a medium of instruction get state support. And this is the demand not merely of English speaking Goan Catholics, but persons from across the social spectrum in Goa. Um, More on English speaking Catholics. Let's look at the church as a location where Konkani is supported. The church has, unfortunately, I think, has had an unfortunate position where it has dug in its heels and it has said that it, by and large, celebrates masses only in Konkani. And you have large categories of people who are looking to rise socially, people who find their inner self in English, who want to attend mass in English, and as a result, they travel large distances to either to Margao or to Panjim for mass in English, or even worse, they don't go to mass at all. Um, so this, I think, is tragic. And I think the hierarchy in the church needs to rethink its position and offer some kind of via media. My own suggestion would be that the hierarchy recognize that the Catholic in Goa, please note I'm making a distinction between the Goan Catholic and Catholic in Goa, because I don't. Anyway, this is another point. But anyway, recognize that the Goan Catholic or the Catholic in Goa speaks multiple languages equally. We speak Portuguese, we speak English, we speak Konkani. These are all our languages, and we should find validation in our worship where all these languages have space. This is not difficult to do, where you can have a mass in Konkani, a homily in English, and hymns in Portuguese, or you can have any one of these variations. And I think this kind of response will speak to the reality of the Goan Catholic, which is almost uh, naturally someone who's cosmopolitan. So I will end there and thank you, uh, Nicole, and for your question.
I guess some that way
We seem to keep losing Vivek. This is not a good sign. Lynette, could you say something, please, or could someone indicate that they can hear me? Oh,
Yeah, 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 Jason, we can hear
lovely,
you. We'll just wait for him to come
lovely.
back. I think he's losing his connection because he's on that phone, I think. But we can take more questions if you can type them in the chat or even comments. They don't have to be all questions. Um, so Dr. Louis Dias has one question for you, Jason. It says too much of churchy Konkani is too Sanskritized. For instance, I remember being puzzled by the Balidan instead of sacrifice. Why did they expunge these words? Uh, and you'll notice that's a new trend that's happening also. A lot of this, especially after the lectionary was revised, I think a lot of this is happening, isn't it?
Well, this was what the research that I started doing after the doctoral work. I picked up this question then, where instead of altar you have Vedi, instead of Padri you have Yadnik, instead of Besan you have Ashirvad. I mean, the kind of Sanskritization, as Louis Dias has pointed out, which is completely unnecessary, I think. From what I understand, this was, and as Leonard rightly pointed out, this happened especially after the revision of the lectionary. And I think there was an attempt to create a single Konkani across all the Konkani speaking communities, all the Konkani speaking Catholic communities, right? So this would include communities in South Canada, North Canada, perhaps in Bombay as well, right? Um, but I think this speaks to the way in which the Catholic Church, and this is what that second round of research was focused on. This is the Catholic Church trying to produce a national church in a sense, work with Indian nationalism. And I think this is works only to the detriment of the faith, right? What you are compromising the faith, or let's say you're compromising the your divine ruler so that you can work with the earthly ruler. I don't think this is consciously recognized, but this is effectively what is happening, and this is tragic. I think it's also, I think, using very outdated understandings of language, which is by and large this scenario in India at least, where there's the idea that language needs to be pure and that there is no mutual intelligibility between persons who speak a similar language form. This is, I think, tragic. And also, there's this desire to produce the pure Catholicism in India, one that is not stained by colonialism. And I think these are all really problematic assumptions, and assumptions that will get that actually put Catholics on the back foot rather than defending our position. There is no doubt that so many of us became Catholic as a result of colonialism. And I personally say thank God for it, right? For all its problems, something good came out of it, because at least for persons who lived under Brahmanical oppression, the colonial period was way, 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 way more liberating than life under Brahmanical oppression. So I think we just need to change the mindsets within the church. This is really the problem. Will Leonard moderate these questions, or do you want me to do it? Leonard? Well, I since the questions are.
Sorry,
No, no.
sorry. No, no. Kevin is saying that this is happening in Mangalore
Yes.
too, because you were referred to that the Santa Mori is now become Bhagyavantu Mori, and so it's not a Goan thing. It looks
No,
like,
most
right?
definitely not. But, but
Yeah.
yeah, but the Mangaloreans seem to have a head start on Indianizing themselves as compared to the Goans. But that's another matter. There was a question from Rahul Chandavarkar who says,
Yeah. He was asking whether another newspaper, or whether there should be more newspapers for a place like Goa, and whether government support will make a difference in having one more.
I think, see, Rahul, one, I don't think you have a daily newspaper in Nagari anymore. Point one. Point two, the question is not of government support for Roman Konkani. I think Roman Konkani has survived without government support, and it will thrive if the government stops persecuting it, stops suppressing it. This is the point, right? Um, and I think it could be that simple, but time will tell. But for now, the question is not to read into the future. The question is to address the injustice in the present and say, recognize the Roman script in the Official Language Act. Welcome back, Vivek. We're happy to have you with us. Um,
So
no,
sorry.
it's okay.
I'm
It's
glad
not
it's
your
going well.
fault. It's the fault of the system you live within. Um,
Digital India.
there is
Yeah. Yeah. G Wave is down in Miramar, my part of Miramar, so I'm running off a phone. My apologies. Please go on taking your
so
questions.
the last question that we received is from Dr. Roana.
Now, have you answered Rahul? Are
Yes,
you done
yes,
with
I'm done
Rahul's
with
question?
Rahul.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
Roana asks, Jason, is it possible for you to please talk a little about the late 18th century, early 19th century in Goa, and how language in Nagari and Roman script may have been mobilized in creating slash sowing the seeds for an imagined community of the Konkani Munis? Hmm. Only an academic could come up with that one. Um, okay. Um, let's say the production of a public sphere in Konkani happens in the 19th century, late 19th century, through the writings of working class Goans in Bombay. So late 19th, early 20th century, with the invention of the tiyat from the earlier what do you call it, the khel tiyat, that tradition that used to exist, of kind of a reform of the reform within quotes. So Konkani comes in into the public sphere among Catholics. Note that at this point in time, Hindu upper caste did not want to identify with Konkani because it was seen as a Catholic language and hence the language of untouchables. This is the fact that Catholics are untouchables is something that is lost on most Catholics, um, because until recently they've been living in communities where Catholicism defines the norms, and they could get by without this, without being impacted by this untouchability. But this untouchability is showing up now that political power is located firmly within a Brahmanical framework. Konkani and Nagari as a way to define the public sphere emerges, as so many Konkani language activists point out, with the work of Varde Valaulikar, whom they call Shenoy Goembab. But as I've pointed out earlier, Varde Valaulikar was trying to create a sphere where the Saraswat could thrive and dominate. This was his interest. There is no doubt that he was secular in the sense that he worked with upper caste Catholics and upper caste Hindus, right? So I'm not accusing him of being a Hindu nationalist in that sense. But there was an idea that Brahmins across religion could work together this was definitely the case. A lot of Catholic Brahmins threw in their lot with these Hindu Brahmins who were trying to create a larger Konkani homeland, right? Um, so this is the case, and what we see in post in later in time is that the Catholic working classes keep supporting Konkani, imagining that they're going to get support for the Roman script. But this is a hope that is betrayed not only by the upper caste Hindu leadership, but especially, and I think the blame has to be borne by the Catholic upper caste leadership, which sell out the working class and caste Catholics in Goa. Right. There is a question from Ashley DeMello, which says, did the Catholic politicians sell out during the Konkani agitation and allow Romy Konkani to take a back seat? Most certainly. If there is one man, one politician who stood by the Roman script, I imagine, is Churchill Alemão. But Churchill Alemão also, I think it would be a fair estimate to say that Churchill Alemão does not dominate the discursive world. His politics is more earthy, and so he was befuddled. So that didn't go very far. But yes, Catholic politicians did sell out. They sold out because they were, I believe, that they were genuinely convinced that there was no space, there was no legitimate space for Konkani in the Roman script because they saw it as foreign. And the idea was we need to get rid of all foreign taints, pollution, as it were, to use the language of untouchability in the language and return it to its pure form. Stuff that people like Zé Pereira would also argue. And just to go back to you, Vivek, I have not forgotten your reference to Zé Pereira. Zé Pereira may have produced a theory about the Konkani language, but I think after my work, it does not have much legs to stand on. It would need someone to take up his position and argue against the formulae that I have proposed. And this argument would definitely need to take caste seriously. Zé Pereira does not take caste seriously at all. It's like it doesn't even exist. And this is not credible anymore. In his time, it may have worked, but it's not credible anymore.
Sure. I think his book is, which is a lovely book. It's on the history and development of Konkani language. It's published in Dharwad. I urge everyone to read it. It's more of it's a political, almost artistic work rather than a work of condensed scholarship. And I think it is worth revisiting. But it makes a historical case quite carefully, which is important. Would you like to? I wanted to quickly cover one little nuance here, which goes back to the question that was asked, I think, by Nicolan, which is about the position of of uh, of of English speaking Goans. And obviously, right, Goan ambition from the 19th century onward was largely there was a trickle of people heading to Portugal to study and to Europe to study, but the vast majority of Goans who their ambitions were served by the English language and British India and abroad, and British colonies in Africa and in East Asia. And it's interesting, this idea of the Konkani Munis, when you wrote about the Konkani Munis, and I realized that there is, it's actually part of the English language writers. So there were many significant English language writers. Arguably the first writer of significance in the English language in India is actually Joseph Furtado. Arguably, I say, because he was published in London, and Edmund Gossey, the leading critic of the Times, wrote about him favorably. And this idea of the Konkani Muni starts to formulate there, actually. Not that he necessarily spoke Konkani, but all the other elements of his character start to form there. And it's interesting, this thing about the Konkani Bhasha Mandal, I like to return to again and again, because Valaulikar was actually surrounded by English-speaking Goan Catholics, right? I mean, and the English speaking Goan Catholics, you could say that, you could say to some extent, like Goan nationalism. I mean, what should I say? Goan, not Goan nationalism, but the nationalist project, the mergerist project, had derived significant motivation and support from Anglophone Goans. So it's interesting how those things dovetailed post 1961. I mean, when I went to the Konkani Bhasha Mandal meeting here in Goa, I was surprised to find that its own history ignores the meetings that took place and some of the meetings that took place in Bombay. I mean, within institutionally, they've actually started to erase some of the actual facts that existed. And I happen to know about it because two of the members, along with Valalikar, were Armando Menezes and H.O. Mascarenas. And they're both members of my family. And I happen to have the records, some of those records. So it was interesting to see that. Shall we take, you should have, there's another question. What's the name of the book I just mentioned by Roanna?
I've responded to that.
Oh, okay. I see. There's a question here by Luis Diaz. I remember reading an account by someone as prominent in Konkani as Alfred Rose, who was made to feel humiliated that his Konkani was not the proper Konkani. An upper caste actually told him to improve his Konkani. Well, I'd like to add to this question, Jason, which is that it's something I was asked a couple of years ago to write about Konkani at the moment because of the controversy caused by Vishnu Surya Wag's book, right, which had won this prize, and then they retracted the prize. And at that time, looking at it, the people kept on referring to. I found that people within the Devanagari sphere, if you want to call it, kept on referring to Konkani as a language in crisis. Yet, when you actually went to look at Konkani, if you look at theatre, if you look at the church, if you look at the things that surround the church, Konkani is thriving, right? So my question actually dovetails with Lewis's, which is that Konkani is thriving, right? But it's not the official. It's not the Konkani that somehow. I mean, can't we just be satisfied with the fact that Alfred Rose is a hugely popular singer? That's my question.
Well, as long as your markers of Konkani are upper caste and no one is taking to it, well, as long as your markers of Konkani are upper caste, then you're not going to be satisfied with an Alfred Rose. You're going to wait for the frankly listless productions that happen in Nagari, right? And no one is buying that. No one is interested in it. And which is why the Konkani establishment generates this fear, this paranoia about Konkani under threat, when in fact, if you look at theatre, it is thriving. So, and then the strange thing about humans is that once a discourse is created, people then just rattle it off without really understanding. So then everyone says, it's like they say, "Voy re moja boila, voy." So everyone says, yes, Konkani is under danger. And actually what is happening very often, people are using this rhetoric to signal other concerns. There is a problem in Goa. Goans are being pushed to a corner, especially Goans who are not well off, right? It is difficult to get a house in Goa. It's difficult to make ends meet. Difficult to have a dignified, decent lifestyle that Goans were used to. And this is happening because of the colonial relationship that we are in with India. This colonial relationship is ideally embodied in the way in which Konkani in Nagari is only recognized. So only if it is on Indian terms will it be recognized. And this is just not on. This needs to be changed. And I think if we can start recognizing this colonial relationship and remedying it, recognizing and remedying a colonial relationship does not mean that we will set up our own country. I think that's a stupid idea. And I mean, at least presently, absolutely unfeasible, and it should not even be recommended. Correcting a colonial relationship means merely that you will stop behaving in a colonial manner. That's all. That you bring justice, equity, and fair play back into the relationship, and everyone can be happy. But unfortunately, the discourse in Go is such that it's always set in Indian terms. So there is absolutely no way in which we can. You are not going to let me assure you that the railway track, the double track is going to progress. The coal harbor is going to come in, no matter what reassurances the government gives you. They will wait for a moment when the protests die down. And as Parikar did with the case of the trees in TV, was it TV? Or in Kolwal? In Kolwal,
Kolva.
they will be chopped down in the middle of the night or in broad daytime before you have time to mobilize. As Parikar did with the trees in Kampal when he expanded the Kampal road, which has now become a death trap. So we need to address these issues and look outside the box rather than keep repeating the terms that have been set by India. I'll stop.
That's, I mean, there's a lot of value to what you say. I must say that the Save Molin group, I mean, since you brought it up, the Save Molin group is exceptionally agile. We now deal in a 21st century set of paradigms, right? I wouldn't be so quick to say that. I mean, I do think that it is a David versus Goliath or Asterix little village against the Roman Empire kind of situation. But I wouldn't be so quick to say that they're going to lose. I think the pandemic situation. I'd like to talk for a couple of minutes about the pandemic situation before we can go back to taking more questions. Is one of the things about the pandemic situation is we're learning just how limited the form of development that's been imposed on Goa and in fact the world, the neoliberal paradigm has been, because Goa, by the numbers, is a very successful, a very wealthy, very well educated state with a superior lifestyle to many of its neighbors, and in fact a beacon across the region. Yet there are many drawbacks to the situation we find ourselves. Jason, we've been talking for an hour and 10 minutes. We can definitely go on. There'll be more questions, but let me ask you, which I did earlier, but we've restarted. How is it going in the pandemic for you? You know what's happening in Goa. How is it going in the pandemic for you? Where are you, and how are you doing?
Well, I am very well, thank you. I'm seem to be doing fine. I'm in Rome, where I'm engaged in a course in theology, and that is feeding into my larger work, and hopefully it'll produce more interesting perspectives. So yeah, it's going well. Just about the Save Mole group, I wish it all the very best. I'm completely with them, and I don't mean to belittle their efforts or their capacities. I have no doubt about their capacities. I'm as impressed as you are. But there is something as I mean, I really wish it will work, but I've also seen Goan history unfold. I've seen the Konkani language agitation. I've seen the Konkan railway agitation. We always see these have all been great groups, numbers mobilized in the thousands, and yet, right. But having said that, as much as I would like to continue, we've also been going on for what, close to more than an hour and a half now. So perhaps it would be a good idea to wind down, because I am wound down.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Why don't we do this? Let me say thank you once again. I'd like you to read something. I'd like you to end with your words. So do you have your book with you?
Unfortunately, not. But in fact, I'm sure I don't even have the. Hold on, let me see if I can. Um,
Okay. Well, while you do that,
hmm.
let me thank Leonard once again for hosting this series, which is I think delivering a lot of value. Once again, I hope it pays off with people buying the book. Jason's book is available at the Dog Years Bookshop. It's challenging, interesting, meticulously meticulously constructed work, and I think it's a very valuable addition to the small bookshelf of serious books that we have about Goa in the 20th century. That's it from me. Please tune in next week to our conversation with the great Ramala Thapar. I'm really looking forward to that. It's her book is on dissent, which is very important at this time. I'm going to have ask Jason to end either with a statement or with something that he's going to read. I would love it. I'd love us to kind of leave on his with his in his voice and with his words. Thank you very much, Jason, and thanks for bearing with me with this awful coming in and out. I'm sorry. I hope it's rectified soon.
Thank you, Vivek, for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. It's been fun. I can't seem to find the soft copy of my book right now, so I'm going to have to disappoint you. But I think the poor viewers have heard me rattle on for a good part of an hour, so they won't be missing much. But thank you for your attention. Thank you for the questions. And I think if I want to leave with one word, I think there is a scholarship on Goa that is slowly coming together. Like I said, one could begin this with Rochelle's book. There is subsequently Raghu Trichur's book, Refiguring Goa. As you mentioned, Parag's book. These are there. There is also the book on Gerson the Cunha by Filipa Vicente, which also falls into this category where it's looking at Goa outside of the frames that are normally presented to us. And I'm expecting works from people like Dale Menezes, Kaustubh Naik, Amita Kanik, also which have dealt with on architecture. Her forthcoming works on the Goan temple is something to look forward to. And I should not forget also the first work by Maria Aurora Couto, where she speaks about the richness of Goan intellectuals under the Portuguese state, right? And this was important for me to kind of realize the depth that is Goa and how we need to be more attentive to Goan history. So on this, I'll end. And thank you very much. Thank you, Leonard. Thank you, Vivek, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Vivek. And again, once again, apologies for starting late and the glitches that happened. But thanks a lot. We had a lovely conversation, very good audience, some great questions. Thanks a lot. Good night.